Hey y'all, welcome to the Bucky Kennedy podcast. If you didn't know, it is currently Pastors Appreciation Month. So I'm sitting down with Bucky today to ask him a little bit about what this month is and how it came about.
Well, it came about, I think, in the early 90s. Promise Keepers is when I first heard of it. H.B. London, Focus on the Family, had a lot to do with pastor appreciation. And it was just a recognition that pastors were needing appreciation. And so they really encouraged churches to encourage their pastors by showing them an intentional day of appreciation.
And we're talking about how it came about and then also what it is, but what is it not that you would want to emphasize to people?
I don't think it's a day in which we show appreciation because they are pitied. We hear a lot about how hard ministry is, and ministry is hard. Ministry's tough, and I can't imagine doing ministry without the call of God on my life. And so there are a lot of expectations that people have toward pastors that are not fair. They're hard. Pastors deal with a lot of inadequacy. As a matter of fact, the vast majority of pastors feel inadequate for the task that they've been given. But it's not a celebration of your pastor out of pity. It's a celebration of your pastor out of appreciation to say, hey, listen, we're thankful that God has called them to this service, to this body. And instead of emphasizing how hard ministry is, it's being grateful for how your pastor handles that difficulty and does it in a way that serves the body well and honors Christ greatly.
You mentioned that it's inadequacy. That's one of those things that pastors struggle with. What are in addition to that, some of those most challenging aspects of the job that a pastor would face that understanding that would help us to appreciate and understand your role more?
Well, anytime you're dealing with a family that's going through a hard time or a sudden loss of life, in ministry, going into the home of a family that's just lost a child, and by accident or by disease or whatever, you have no words. I mean, there's nothing you can say, and they're not real interested in the theological implications of life and death at that time. So what you have to do is you have to learn the ministry of being there, just being there, and offering comfort. And even though you may be able to explain the theological implications and understanding that we live in a corrupt, sin-fallen world and it infects all of us, the just and the unjust, it's loving them in the moment that they're in. But you just feel so overwhelmed and inadequate for that because you know it's a gut-wrenching, heartbreaking time. And you feel the pressure of wanting to go in there and helping them come to some understanding, and it's so difficult. And, and then there are people that just expect pastors to be able to do a lot of things that we can't do. And, that their expectations are off the chart. And I know as a pastor, I want to help people as much as I can, but there are some people I just can't help. There's some things I can't do. It's always interesting, Mary, somebody comes and says, hey, you need to go and talk to this person. Well, one, you're assuming they listen to me and they want to do right. So I'm not clairvoyant. I don't know what people think. Sometimes people assume that. And in the age of social media, they think that pastors know everything because surely the pastor's on social media and they're paying attention to what I say on social media and know what I'm going through. They may or may not. I've got a lot of pastor friends that don't do social media because they see their church members doing things that just discourage them. And there's nothing that encourages a pastor than being on social media and seeing their church family doing some things that are ungodly and just not helpful at all. And so some of those guys would rather not be on social media, just not to deal with all the drama of social media. So we're not clairvoyant, and there's an expectation that we are somehow clairvoyant, that we can look at people and know that they're going through some difficulty. So, there's a lot of those things that are out there that people get in there. There's high expectations, unmet expectations, unknown expectations, difficult situations, impossible things that come in when you're dealing with multiple personalities and all those things that come from different traditions, different backgrounds. It really is a juggling act at times for pastors.
And expectations are so prevalent. They can be so dangerous when you don't understand what you should be expecting. So you put false expectations that can leave you disappointed or frustrated at a person, in this case, at someone in a certain role that they're supposed to be playing. And I think having false conceptions of what the role of someone is, or even their capacity of what they should and can't do, builds upon these expectations that can be so dangerous in how people respond and then feel let down or frustrated by an expectation not being met when it actually originated from a misconception.
Oh, yeah. Well, I always tell churches whenever they've called me to be their pastor, I've had the privilege of serving in 3 churches, and I love every church I've ever served in. Being here at North Hall Church is probably the most different ministry I've ever done. But I've always told them, because they bring up, we want to know, can we trust you? And I always turn around and say, well, can I trust you? Because you've told me the type of church you want to have. Can I trust you that you're going to be a part of helping us get to that church? And there is trust. There's the trust that congregation has in their pastor, but then there's the trust that the pastor has to have in that congregation. And I always believe great churches make great pastors, and that's how it works. It's just kind of like the quarterback on a football team. The people around him really help him do whatever he does, whether they're receivers or an lineman. If he doesn't have a great offensive line, he's not going to get the pass off. If he doesn't have great receivers and running backs, he's not going to be able to have anywhere to hand the ball or throw the ball. So it really is a pastor being a part of a congregation that has that same desire to see that church be all that God's called it to be, and that's usually not a number marker. And that's the other thing about expectations. I mean, how we define success. If you define a successful ministry based on the number of people you have in your church, then you're going to become a slave to that. And that is not a fun place to be. I've lived in that cave, and it is dark and desperate. It is not a place you want to be. Or the amount of resources you have, the money in the bank. Those are 2 common measurements that we look at to say whether a church is successful or unsuccessful. I would say the Bible would push back on that. Noah, for 120 years, builds a boat and preaches, get in the ark, and only his family. There's 8 of them that show up. I think we kind of look at this. Jesus feeds 5,000, then preaches a sermon about what it is to be a Christian, and he loses almost all of them. So I would say when you start playing that numbers game and you say that your ministry is a success based on the number of people that are in your congregation or the amount of money that's in the bank, it may be a terrible measurement. The measurement you should have is, am I fulfilling what God's called me to do? Am I leading this church to be the church that Jesus wants it to be? Now, healthy things grow. That's true. But if you're living in a rural area where there's only a population of 500 and you have 100 or so people in your church, you've got 1/5 of your population. Now, if I had 1/5 of the population of Hall County, I don't have the building to hold them right now. So I would say that pastor out there that's got 1/5 of his community, man, you're killing it. You're killing it. So it's all relative. And I believe some of the best preachers we've never heard are preaching in some places that we don't even know about. I believe they're out there and they're serving in such a way and doing such a great job. And they are unknown heroes. And they're out there. They don't have the platform that, for instance, I have on a podcast or some of these other people. But we live in such a celebrity age, Mary, where we think these pastors, these celebrity pastors, and there's a difference between calling a celebrity pastor and then a well-known pastor. A well-known pastor may not be a celebrity pastor. He's just known by a lot of people. But those celebrity pastors out there that expect us to listen to them because they have such a large audience and they expect certain treatments because they are who they are and they have what they have. We live in that celebrity environment, and sometimes for preachers that are out there plowing on hard soil every day, it gets disheartening when they look at there and they see these celebrity-like guys out there. So that's just another way. It's another thing that pastors have to deal with, of expectations and stuff that people may have. And, man, I just want to encourage these guys that are out there. Listen, God's got you there. You keep plowing, you keep planting, and trust God to do the watering and the growing, and be encouraged for that.
And that really speaks to, I think, the expectation that pastors have on themselves.
Yes.
Not just what people have on them, but the ones that they set on themselves. And that will impact their discouragement or their encouragement of what they're doing, is the expectation that they have based off of where the Lord has brought them, who he's brought them around, and what the Lord expects from them. But on the topic of expectation, in the years that you've been pastoring in this realm, in this space, how have your expectations changed or been exceeded in what you get to do?
Well, I'm always amazed that I get to do anything, and I know there might be somebody listening and said, but yeah, you've never pastored a church of less than 50. Yeah, I have. The church I'm in right now started with 40. So I know what it is to pastor a small church, and and God's blessed it and it's grown and all that kind of stuff. But I think my expectations are, instead of looking at the number of people in the congregation, I want to think about the nature of our church. Are we looking like the body of Christ? Are we showing that? Are we manifesting the nature of Christ in how we worship and how we serve? Much more attentive to that nature than I am the number. And that gets difficult. And that it's a lot more difficult to focus in on the nature than it is to focus in on the number. And so I think that's an expectation that's changed a great deal. And again, I've been in this 40 years, so it's had to grow into that. And I'm more excited about what I see God doing because I believe we're in the last days. And I think, man, there are two times you want to be around: when things get started and when things wind down. And so these are difficult days. These are dark days. But what a day to be in the fight and to be able to be a part of this bride of Christ that prepares her to leave. That God would trust you in this time frame. And so I think that's an exciting time to pastor. We pastor in some exciting days. That doesn't mean that they're great days, but they certainly are exciting days.
And you spoke to it a little bit just then about some of the exciting parts of it, but what to you has been the most rewarding part of your 40 years in this space?
Anytime you get to see somebody come to Jesus, but that's, I love evangelism, but I also love seeing people grow in Christ and being able to reproduce, that there are people that are in the ministry today because of the ministry that you had, and that God used you to stir their heart to go into ministry, to watch people go on the mission field, to see all of that happen and know that God used you in a way to introduce them to this calling on their life, and to watch that done. To see families get healed, that they were on the verge of busting up and breaking up, and then you see God come in there and you heal that marriage and you heal that family. To see people delivered from addiction. Anytime when you're watching those that everybody else is counted out, and then God shows up and now they are people that are counted on, that's always a big time. I love watching that. I love watching other people on my staff succeed. I love seeing my staff succeed. I love seeing our children's ministry, our student ministry, the people that work in our office. I love it when the light comes on and they succeed. I enjoy that. That's just good. And so the reality of it, Mary, we're in ministry, we're all working our way out because we're working our way up. And so that's that. But up, not necessarily up the social ladder or the corporate ladder, but that's the reality. Is I'm for 40 years I've tried to work my way out of a job, and it's just I get excited watching other believers, and because what that does is that encourages me, because when I'm not being effective, to have other people come along, because pastors, we go through these things. We need those people to come and help us, and it's not about being celebrated. It's about being encouraged. And so what pastor appreciation is that encouragement. It's not hyping your pastor up. It's not feeding his ego. I often hear something, well, we're just going to give him the big head. Trust me, there are a lot of people around there that'll make sure that head won't swell too much. So whatever head you think you're going to puff up, whatever ego you think you're going to lift up, there are people there that will come alongside and balance it out for you. So I just, I think that's the deal, is to show that appreciation and to acknowledge, your gratitude for that pastor and their leadership.
I would agree. It's not just about appreciation. I like the word you used. It's also about gratitude. And hearing you describe all of those things that are so rewarding about what you do, I think gives people a better picture of not just what they see on a Sunday morning, but everything else that a pastor does and all the other areas that they pour into people's lives, or being able to relate to, yes, this is what a pastor has done for me in my life. And I think that gives people, even a conversation like this, gives people a better picture of what your role entails, which in turn gives them more of an appreciation and really, I would say, a gratitude for what pastors do and what really, more importantly, what the Lord has called them to. Because when you have a better understanding of the why that somebody does what they do, it gives you a better gratitude and appreciation and confidence in what they do, quieting some of those misconceptions that we talked about or some of those false expectations, and really just seeing them doing what the Lord has called them to. And I think that sheds light and gives a better view and perspective on what everybody does, in this case, in this conversation, on what a pastor does and what the Lord has called them to, their heart on why they've been called to it. So it in turn helps the people understand who this person is and why they do what they do, which I think is the value in having a conversation like this.
Well, I hope so. I mean, I want to encourage pastors, not because I'm getting it all done. Goodness gracious, Mary, there's so many times I've failed. I remember the failures more than I remember the successes, and so we all live through that. There's not a perfect pastor. We always say there's not a perfect church, and then we list all the problems, the ways it's not perfect. Well, there aren't perfect pastors, but a healthy pastor is always seeking, how do I best serve Jesus and serving the people that I'm with? And I think that's it. Now, at the heart, I'm a hot-hearted preacher. I just want to preach, I tell people I'm not really good at counseling. I mean, I'm really, I'm not. I just tell people when they go, I have a hard time with my temper. I say, well, cool down, next, or just stop whatever you're doing wrong. Just, but I've had to learn how to bring that into play and stuff like that. So I really... I love the fact, I'm amazed that God's called me to serve in this. It's only that by God's hand that I could serve. And I genuinely mean that. There's no way that I would have chosen this life in and of myself. Would not have done it. But understanding the call of God on my life, there's no way that I would see myself doing anything else. And so I think most guys that are called of God to do that see it that way. They're probably the most surprised person in the world of what God's done with their life. I know I am. I am the most shocked at what God has, by His hand, used in me to do. And I am 100% sure that none of that would be possible without Him, because it wasn't on my radar.
And you sharing that and articulating that, once again, it's not bringing the attention on you, but you are a vessel that in turn puts the attention back on the Lord. And that is not just what you do, but it's an example that you as a leader, but also we as Christians ought to emulate, is that in whatever we do and whatever the Lord has called us to, the goal is to understand why we do it, but really to in turn and in the end bring the focus back on the Lord and whatever He calls us to. And in this case, what pastors are called to is really to bring glory to the Lord and put people's attention back on them. But as we wrap up today, we're talking about showing appreciation to pastors, having gratitude. What would be your encouragement to other pastors as we wrap up our conversation?
Well, I think always remember that you're fighting on enemy territory. I mean, the world is not friendly to what you've been called to present. And so, stay equipped in your battle. I mean, always put on the armor of Christ. Be in the Word of God. Find people in your life that you trust, that will speak truth into your life, but encouragement in your life. They don't need to police your life, but they need to be people that you trust, to offer godly wisdom to you. One of the worst things I ever heard was that a pastor should never be close friends with people in his congregation. I thought that's the most ridiculous statement I've ever heard. Some of my dearest friends have been the people that I've pastored, and that I've built relationships with. That's like telling a shepherd, don't love your sheep. You've got people in your congregation that you press into. It doesn't mean that they are exclusive to you. I have great friends that don't go to my church. But I'd say you've got to have people in your life. Build camaraderie with other pastors. We live in such a contentious time. Build camaraderie with other pastors. You're not in competition with them. You guys are to complement each other. There's a camaraderie. I'm blessed to have men in ministry that are serving in the ministry today that are dear friends of mine, that we have discussions that no one else could have that wasn't in ministry. And they are on a list. My wife has a list of people that if she feels like I'm struggling in need of help, there are people that she knows to call. And I'm on their list so that if their wife would ever call. So I always say, hey, do the people in you have people that they can call to speak to you in times of despair? You ought to have those in your life. So I think that's it. I mean, those are things that encourage me in ministry, that I would encourage pastors to have. Even in hard places, embrace what God's calling you to do. And trust God that He has not abandoned you. And just press into that and dig into that word. And never make it about who you are. Always be tuned into who He is. And that's the best advice I've ever been given.
Yes, that's a good word, I think, for everyone listening in terms of the call that the Lord has on your life, stepping into that, faithfully pursuing that, and finding how you can be grateful for that call and also point others back to the Lord in whatever you do. So thank you for having this conversation with us, giving us your why. I hope it shed light on a lot of things for y'all, and thank you again for listening in.
For more content like today's podcast, click right here. For sermons, click right here. And again, please like, share, comment, and subscribe. Have a blessed day.